Hello everyone. Are you in the phase of your project where you need to have fundamental decision? Fundamental decision as in that you have a database and you have your application layer. The application layer probably is in Java and the database can be any database which you have. And you are in a fundamental phase where you need to decide how do you connect your Java code to the database. Should you use a ready-made solutions like ORM tools which maps the objects to the database tables, or you write the plain SQL query. So, for example, if you want to get some rows from the database tables, you just make a select from where cross. That's a simple SQL query. Or do you use the things like hibernate? That is, you use the hibernate concepts and then connect your objects to the database and then get the data. So this particular topic is coming into the picture because recently I was going through one of the LinkedIn posts by some very senior person, and he said, and I completely resonate with it as well, that in his experience, using an ORM tool is not a very good option in many of the cases. So you can disagree, and that's why this particular video is mostly about my experiences and what I have observed, that how using a extra layer on top of the database just creates a problem and it's just a hassle for you overall. And in many cases, we moved out of such layers. So let's quickly get started and talk about the hibernate overall so that we understand that what are the disadvantages and how you can get away with those. So the same thing will hold for other ORM tools as well, nothing different. So what exactly does the hibernate or any such ORM tool does? So to understand it, let's first understand how we write our code in Java or any object-oriented language and how things are there in the database, particularly the relational database. So the way things are there in our objects is that we have a person class. Let's say there are multiple person. I am a person. There might be somebody else who is also a person. So that class has some ID, person ID 1, person ID 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, etc. And the name like Anubhav, Abhinav, etc. And then we have list of phones. So a person can have multiple phones. So for example, I can have 2 phones. You might have 3 phones. Somebody else might have 4 phones, and somebody else might not even have any phone. So they can have phones, and that could be a list. And then there could be a separate class called as phone, and that phone could have ID and then name could be iPhone, and ID could be IMEI number or anything of those sorts. You can complicate it if you want to. You can have names and you can have price, cost, selling price, whatever, etc. And then when you write your Java program, this is how you write. You have a public, and then if you want to get the list of people, that's list of person here, then you write a method, and then you write some code to fetch the data from the database or wherever the external source, etc. The way things look in the database is a little different, and you can of course change the database schema and have your own method of putting the data into the database. Nothing special here overall. So you have a person table which corresponds to the person class here. So the class name becomes the table name, and the variable names become the column name. So there would be a person table with a column called as ID and the column called as name. So you just map these stuffs directly. And likewise for the class called as phone, you have table name called as phone, and then you have variable names which will correspond to the member variables or the column names. And then since you have a relationship between person and phone, you create one more table, that is person underscore phone, where you map what are the people who have the particular phone. So you can have a mapping. Now this particular schema can be little different based on how you want your data to be set up. Personally, I would not want very much normalized data. My personal choice might be a little different compared to yours. And also it might depend upon the type of query you want to do. But you get the point that how you represent your objects and how you represent things in the database. Now, when you want to get the list of person, if you are using Hibernate, what do? or similar ORM tool. So these ORM tools, they provide some wrapper or some methods. What it does is that they say that, hey, you don't need to write these queries on your own. You just write this code, session.create criteria. Don't get into the details of syntax. I am not going to talk about syntax. There are already lots of tutorials around syntax. But you see that we have session.create criteria, and then you write something, and that gives you the whole object. It gives you person, and it gives you the list of phones, etc. And then there are nuances as well, that there you can choose when to get the list of phones, or you can choose to get only ID and name, etc. That's separate. But you can write a query in Hibernate to get the complete object if you want to. And likewise, in the database, what it will do is that this code, this Java code, of course, the SQL or any database do not understand your Java or Python code. They understand their own queries or their own syntax. Postgres might have their own syntax. Microsoft SQL has their own syntax. Likewise, all the databases have their own syntax. So you can configure in it that which database you are using, and then what will happen is that it will convert this code to a SQL query. So if you are using Postgres, it will convert it to a query which Postgres understands. If you are using, let's say, Microsoft SQL Server, then it will convert it to the query which Microsoft SQL Server understands. Likewise, MariaDB, etc. So it will convert to this query, and of course, you need to provide the information about these stuffs, and then it will convert this query to this form, and then eventually query the data from the database and give it back to you. So this is what overall the ORM tool does, that it allows you to deal with objects, and it says that, hey, the query part will deal by ourselves. I just want to show you the same thing using the code as well, so you understand it better, what exactly I'm trying to say. Again, don't get into the details of the code. Personally, I also don't want to get into the details of code, but just try to understand what exactly is happening. So I have a simple Java project I cloned from someone. You can check out in the GitHub. I didn't want to code myself the whole thing. So you have a Java project with you. And what I have done is that I have two dependencies here. One is the Hibernate dependency, and the other is a Postgres, because I'm planning to use Postgres. Now, the things which I need to do is to have some configurations. Once I'm done with the configuration, the things are straightforward post that. I have a Postgres database running on my local, so I need to provide the details here in the config file. And then a bunch of things like these are the two classes which I wish to map to the database tables. So I have a table called as person and table called as phone in my database. So correspondingly, I need to create classes. So I have created a class called as person, and I have to map that as entity and table. And these are the column names. So I am mapping the column name to the variable name. So this mapping part, I don't have to do by myself. I just tell the framework that, hey, these are the mappings which should be there, and the column name, first name, should map to the variable name called as first name. And likewise, these mappings, I inform the class, and the mapping happens by itself. I also, since this person has this phone, so I had to do this one-to-many relationship. That is, a person has phone, and it is mapped by column called as person ID. So basically, a phone would also have a phone and ID, these stuffs. So a person can have phone, and this mapping happens using the person ID, and there is a separate table called as person phone. So basically, some mapping happens using the code, and then all you need to do is to write the plain Java code. And here also we can define what database we are using. So I could just change the dialect to MS SQL, and this code will just work for Microsoft SQL Server. So if I have to move from one database to other, the only thing I need to do is to change the queries here. So a lot of technical stuffs But overall, you get the sense that you can do a bunch of configuration. You can inform Hibernate about the classes which needs to be mapped to the database tables. Here you define the table names. And then once you do that, you can check the same thing in your database as well. So basically what it will do is it will create the same table here in the database. This is a Postgres database. So basically I have a person table which has the person related information. So basically I have a person called James Bond. So I have the information about person. I have the second table called as phones. So the phone there are two phones, iPhone and Samsung and Apple. And then the third table actually maps the two. That person ID 3 has phone 1 and person ID 3 has phone 2. So it automatically generates these three queries. And now whenever I wish to query, what I do is that I just run some commands and some Java code to do the same thing. So here, when I wish to save the data, so I'll just show you a bit. I don't want to get into the details of the code. It's straightforward and there are lots of tutorials around this. But just to get a sense of what we are doing here is that, let's say I want to insert a data to the database. I'll just call save command. So I'll create some object and then I'll just run save command and it will save the things to the database. And I can commit the transaction. So I can do bunch of things using the Java program itself. So I don't have to write the code by myself. It will convert my instructions to the Java based program and it will do the same thing for me. So for example, if I run this, let's say I run this program, get projection. So basically here I'm doing a select from where and I'm selecting a few columns. So if I run this program, what it will do is that it will convert my Java code to a particular query and then it will run for me. So that's the overall idea and that's how the things work here, that you can configure a bunch of stuffs and then it works. Now let's get into the advantage. I have not talked about the Hibernate or ORM tool in a tutorial form. I'm just talking about the features here. Just keep in mind. So that's why I'm not getting into the details of the code. But I wanted to show you the facility. The facility is that you write something in Java and it gives you the data in the form of the SQL query. It gives you a SQL query. It runs the SQL query and gives you the data. That's the idea. Now I'll come back to again, the things which I was talking about. So this is object, this is database, and we write some code and it converts it to the language which database understands, and then it gives you the data. Now, let's talk about some advantages. And advantages are not many. So that's why I just want to walk through it. So the first thing is that it converts the plain Java code to the SQL query. But again, my question is, why do you need to convert the plain Java code to SQL query? Can't you write your own Java code? So they say that this is an advantage, but personally, I don't agree, because there will be many times when it will be better for you to write query by yourself. And I'll talk about it in the disadvantage part. Why do you not want to understand the Java query, which you understand the SQL query, which this Hibernate will generate? You should understand what is happening behind the scene. It should not be all abstracted for you. The second is that configurable to change the database type. So for example, there was this one configuration in which you could choose the dialect, that is from Postgres to Microsoft SQL is just a configuration change. So you write a Java code, Hibernate will convert your Java code to a SQL query, and based on whatever configuration, if you are using Postgres, it will convert to Postgres, etc. So that's a second advantage. But again, my question is, why would you want to do that? And has it ever happened for you in the last, whatever your career has been, that you change the database type just like that? I'll talk about it in more detail in the next page. But yeah, the database type migration becomes easier. There's a two and third points are just same. I should have just merged second and third. But you get the idea that they assume that the Java developer or the application developer cannot write a very good SQL query. But I don't personally agree and, buy that argument. Coming to the some of the disadvantages of the ORM tool, and the first thing is that SQL query, the things which was supposed to be very simple now became very complicated. So something like select ID comma name, or let's say it's ID comma name from a student's table. So this is ID, just as a correction. So this was a simple query which you could write in your Java program. There are various drivers using which you could write. This became so complicated for us to understand that session dot create criteria on an object student set projection add projection. It's doing the same thing, but it is doing in a form which you have to understand more. So it's doing too much of a thing, and it just gets hard for us to understand what exactly it is doing, and it acts one extra layer on top of the. It's not at all making things easier. You still have to understand so many things. So earlier you were understanding SQL query, you were closer to the database. Now you are understanding all these stuffs and mumbo jumbos jargons. The second is that the taking join case by case increases your work. So let's say you want to take a join between two tables. So in SQL query, you know how to take a join, select from where, etc. So you can do all those stuffs in SQL. But in Hibernate, what you need to do is to have some annotations. So if I can talk about those, let me quickly go to my code here, and you can see that I added some of the annotations earlier. So basically I added something called as join. So you need to add those annotations, and then what happens is that, let's say I run this code. So what I'm doing is that I'm trying to have a select query. So here somewhere I'm trying to have a select query. So session.create criteria. I'm trying to get some data from the database. So here, when I do that, the Hibernate generates this query for me. So inner join, and basically I can just go and run this query for myself. So I can go to the Postgres here, and I can just run this query for myself, and it will give me the data. So the Hibernate has just generated this query for me, and it gives me the same data. So yeah, that's one thing I could do, that it just creates a query for me. But the problem is that there are a lot of things you need to understand when you do those stuffs. So you need to understand these annotations. So earlier you were dealing with SQL. So you're not getting away with the SQL overall. You still have to understand what is happening behind the scene. You still have to understand what query Hibernate is generating, because many times it will generate a query which is not fully optimized. So you still have to understand it. You have to understand things like lazy loading, eager loading. These are some of the concepts of Hibernate. So basically, I don't want to get into the details, but there are multiple nuances in Hibernate which you have to understand fully before using it. And then the query generated by Hibernate is not always optimized. So as I talked earlier, here I'm taking join between two tables, but you understand your data better. You understand your size of the tables, that if I'm taking join between two tables, I know the size of the left table and right table. I know what criteria to apply, which will be better. So, but Hibernate does not fully understand those things. So it can generate a query which would not be the best one for you. And it has happened in the past as well. So it happened with me, I think many years back. What was happening in our team was that we bumped up the Hibernate version, and then after bumping up the Hibernate version, the Hibernate was generating a query which was not fully optimized. So it just slowed our things overall. So why would you want to have a layer to generate a simple query like this? And it's not giving you anything overall. Still, you have to understand how these Java codes and nuances of Hibernate works. There is a concept of, instead of SQL, what Hibernate folks have done is that, so instead of SQL, they say that don't use SQL, you can use HQL, which is Hibernate query language. So you are again going towards the direction of query languages itself. So why not use the native one and get away with the things? So that's one extra thing. And the last one is that this will never happen, that you have to migrate the data from one database to other. So there was this one feature I was talking about earlier, that you could just migrate from Postgres to MySQL or Postgres to Microsoft SQL Server. You could do that, but why would you do that? So, and even if you do that, generally, because I have also been part of similar migration projects. So what happens is that if you are migrating the data from one database to other database, let's say you were using something else and now you plan to use something else, it is not just the migration. It is not just the migration of the data. Basically, when you are revamping a project or doing stuff like those, mostly it is about, enhancing the overall features. So you will also change the database schema. You will also change the table names. You will follow the new patterns which are there at the particular time. So let's say you designed something in 2010 and now you are revamping the same thing in a new database in 2023. So it will not happen that you just copied the whole data from one database to other. It will be mostly involving the nomenclature changes and the table changes, and maybe you have a different schema altogether, not even the schema which was there earlier. So the database type change on the fly is something which is a facility given by Hibernate, so that you could write a common code and you don't have to understand the nuances of SQL and Postgres. But trust me, you have to understand those nuances. You cannot go on production without understanding the database itself. So if your project deals with the database, you have to understand the database. You can't just throw your solutions to Hibernate and expect Hibernate to understand your solution slash code to generate the query. You still have to do that. So yeah, that's it from my side for this video. I hope this video was helpful. The point which I wanted to make here is that, yeah, be the guest and use Hibernate or any wrapper library you want to, but please understand it fully, because it is doing the work which you should do. So it is generating a SQL query which you could write on your own. So many times it might not write the best query for you. And there are so many scenarios which you have to deal on your own in Hibernate. So just weigh in the solutions and weigh in the pros and cons. I would say that use such tools and libraries only when the scale is not very high. And I know you might have the contrary examples where people use these tools and they scaled tremendously. Yes, they would have done that. But it mean, but when the project scales, you have to become master of all those pros which were marketed in the beginning, that you can do all these things with Hibernate without understanding the database. All these pros just go away. So what happens eventually, you will end up understanding all the database nuances, all the internals of database when your project scales. So you anyway have to do that. So why not start from the beginning and write optimized query overall? So whenever you write any query, it should be the optimized one. And the tools do not understand your database. Tools do not understand the size of the table. So the database performance tuning and concurrency controls and all those things, they can be better handled by you compared to any library. So yeah, that's it from my side for this video. I hope this video was helpful. Till the next time, bye.